Hi class, and welcome to this week's lesson. Lesson 11. So this week we are going to be focusing on charts and graphs in Excel. I love this lesson. This is probably, to be 100% honest, out of everything in the class, I feel like this one can be most used in the workforce. And maybe it's just because of what I do in my job, but I can't tell you how many times I make a chart or a graph in Excel to show data. It's just a great tool to have. I mean, you can look at a spreadsheet with a ton of numbers, and as exciting as that is, it's actually pretty boring. You throw a graph on there to show you some information, and it just, then the information just pops out at you. So there's a 13-minute video on charts and graphs from Brother Baird. Please watch that. It's shorter than last week, so that's nice. But really, kind of going back to what I was talking about last week with YouTube, YouTube is a great source for finding how to do things in Excel. So if there's some sort of chart or graph that you want to learn more about, or if you watch the video and you're like, I just wish there was a little bit more, just YouTube charts and graphs in Excel. And you will find a plethora. There's some basic tutorials out there that will just kind of take you through each of the different types of graphs. If there's a specific graph you want to do, then you can search for that. Don't be afraid to use that. I would, sometimes I think, I should just, maybe I should make one, but when I search on YouTube and there's like literally hundreds of them, I'm like, well, these guys that make them, they're a lot more, they're better at making videos about it, and they're even better at Excel. So please utilize that resource. Also, kind of coming off of last week, just a little reminder, if you haven't reached out to me and you want to still retake the exam, you can. You can actually technically retake any of the exams. So this was exam 3 that we just took. If you want to retake 2 or 1, this is kind of the point of the semester where you should be looking at your grade. Hopefully you're looking at it all semester long, but you're still at that point where, coming into week 11 here, you could still bump that grade up. So if you're kind of on the fence of that, from a C to a B or a B to an A, and you're like, what could I do just to bump it up? Well, keep working hard for the rest of the semester. That's step 1. But go back and look at some of your exams, and if you didn't score as well, and you're like, if I retook that exam and can get a couple more %, that might bump your grade up. Those exams weigh pretty heavily on your overall grade. So please let me know if you want to retake it. I'm happy to go in and allow that for you. This week for your project, you will be making a graph of creating savings growth over 20 years. Now, when you do this, we want to make sure that our graph has what we call an exponential rate, right? So linear would just be like just a straight line. Exponential is when it kind of starts low and it goes up like this. And if you remember back to the lesson where we calculated the future value of savings accounts, you saw that when you start adding interest into it. It would be linear if you say you put $100 in a month into an account and it didn't gain any interest. That would be very linear, right? Because every month I'm just going to add $100. But when you add interest to it, you're adding $100 plus you're getting a little bit more of interest. So at first it's pretty slow and it almost looks like it's linear, but then it'll really start to grow towards the end of your 20 years. So that's going to come from 4.1 part C. It'll come from that, but it's pretty generic. I mean, it doesn't have a whole lot of guidelines. It just says, create a 20-year savings plan and then create a graph of it. So what that graph should be of is it should be of your account balance at the end of each year. So I should see 20 tick marks basically on your graph, and then each one of those tick marks should be associated with what value your savings account is. So the last thing for this week is please try and finish your financial book this week. Next week is when the report is due, but on top of that, the material next week starts to get a little more difficult as well. So I'd feel bad if you go into next week. There's quite a bit of videos and the coursework. It has to do with graphing, but it's on paper and using equations to make graphs. So that's a little insight into next week. Anyways, so please try and finish your book this week. That way next week you're not trying to learn the new material, finish your book, and write your book report. You can just focus on learning the new material and finishing your book report, which honestly is enough in itself. So please try and get that book. It would be worth your time. If you have to cram, it would be worth your time to cram this week rather than next week when there's more material to do. So please reach out to me with any questions, any thoughts you have, and I hope you have a great week.